This is Wagon Meister, and today we are here for another episode. Actually, episode 3, but technically it would be maybe the middle episode. On Thursday was episode 2.5. Anyway, back to what I was saying. This is the Guy in a Basement podcast, and today, joining me is my friend, very good friend I've known for a good amount of years. It is Hassion. Hassion, please say hello.
Good morning, everybody, or afternoon, evening, or wherever you are in the world. It's a pleasure to be on. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Look forward to a good show.
Thank you, and thank you for coming on. We really, I really appreciate it. This is a one-man show at this point. Well, you get what I mean when I say that. I'm the one that runs it, but there you go.
Oh, it'll get bigger, I'm sure.
Thank you. I hope and willing.
So,
yes.
Absolutely. So, getting right into it.
All right.
A few things I've always been curious about, just because I know you've been in Japan for a very long time. You've taught there for many years. I had a few questions to pick about their cultural scene, just because
Okay.
I know a few of your guests have talked about Japan and a few other places, and like the teaching scene, all that kind of stuff, and food, and all the more touristy things. Well, the bigger touristy things I feel people have been missing is like the side of the cultural, the arts, the temples, the museums you can get into. So I wanted to try and cover a couple of those.
So you
My
wanna,
first one, though.
Yes.
hmm
So you want to get into kind of like classical culture, the more like Japan that like is not pop culture based or such. Absolutely.
Because there's a lot to see out there, even in the countryside, and I had a feeling you were based out further towards that kind of stuff. So
Very true.
I definitely have my opinions and things, but as far as it goes, my current question would be Kabuki, and no, have you ever seen any shows, and do you have a favorite?
Well, first and foremost, let me say that I have indeed seen Kabuki. Well, wait, let me rephrase that. I have indeed seen No beforehand. I've seen it twice in person. One time being during both times were during my study abroad period at the end of 2017. That was a really good time. It was very, very mentally relaxing. However, I have not seen any Kabuki. But you are very smart to ask me about this. I actually took a class on that at university. So feel free to ask away.
I definitely would have to pick your brain on a couple of things. What play did you see for the No Show, and where did you sit?
Let's see. I saw this No Show, which is hilarious that that's the way we're saying this. We saw this
I
No
know.
performance. It was at the first shrine that if you were going to traditionally climb up Mount Fuji, the Fuji Yoshida Sengen Shrine. Has the largest stone gate in all of Japan. And I saw this, and I believe I saw a play. Let's see. It was definitely a ghost play. There are 5 types of No plays, and they all follow a certain pattern based on the artistic quality of impermanence, which is a Buddhist ideal. And it was the way No works is it's portioned like this. Usually, instead of doing a 5 structure playthrough, where they have the 5 different types of plays, just like there's a hero play, there's a ghost story, there's a love story, there's I don't know the exact ones right now. It has been some time since I've looked at it, and I do believe I sold my textbook explaining it. But, my good sir, they often include another type of play called Kyogen, which is entirely based around comedy, and usually it's about lower class people making fun of upper class snobs. And
Interesting.
yeah, it's very funny. And I actually, one of the plays I studied about in that type, I believe I saw both 2 plays in the same performance time that follow plays that I did study back in university, following coming back to America the first time.
That's pretty interesting. So, just to ask a question, do you think these plays and things, as far as like comparableness to like Western culture, No and Kabuki are kind of the Broadway of Japan for a lot of these things, don't you think? Granted,
Yeah, go ahead.
their shows, our shows can just be about fantasy or stories and things. Kabuki and No tend to teach morals, or sometimes they are just fun stories. Um, do you think there's a comparableness to Western culture as far as our playcraft versus Kabuki, or no?
Yeah, so what I would say, and mind you, I'm just a layman in this, is that if you look at Japanese stage production, No being the first, and then Kyogen being coming from that as the humor, kind of the lighten the mood, because no plays are often serious, and it's in Japanese. Think of it like this. Let's begin with No as the first major one. It was invented by samurai at the beginning of that time, and the Japanese they speak there is like speaking Anglo-Saxon to a modern Japanese person. It's very different in its structure and style. You can kind of catch some of it, but it's very poetic. And it's draws on kind of a religious, spiritual vibe. Kyogen is much more mundane and humor-based, and that just came to lighten the mood because it's hard to do that. So imagine like watching an epic in a Roman theater for maybe that, or maybe like a skald telling a story with actors playing it out or something for No, and Kyogen being like the comedy routine in between, right?
Okay.
Now, when you get into Kabuki, that started during the long period of peace before Japan opened up to the world. Japan was a closed country, Sakoku and all. Although, truth be told, that is not true because they had trade with 4 different spots.
Dutch, right?
Yeah, the Dutch were in Nagasaki, but they also traded with the Chinese through Okinawa, which was called the Ryukyu Kingdom. They traded with Korea through the island that's between the two the Kyushu, the bottommost large island, and the Korean Peninsula with the island of Su. And then they traded with the, let's see, what do you call them? The Ainu people, who then traded as an in-between people with the Russians through the north in Hokkaido.
But reminds me of one of the anime I watched was Gold Kamui. They talked about the Ainu and the Kafuku people and that kind of stuff, which is interesting.
Yes. That's a whole wonderful thing to learn about the different types of how do I describe it?
The native Japanese or indigenous Japanese?
Indigenous,
I'm not sure how to describe.
It would be like saying, okay, this is a very controversial topic in academics inside Japan, but outside of Japan, it's basically been thought that most Asiatic-looking Japanese are descended from Koreans who migrated through, and the people before them, the Jomon, were people probably of northern Siberia related to probably like Native Americans and various tribes up there. Ainu and the people of Okinawa, the Ryukyuans, it's interesting because they have a different genetic structure for not only like earwax type, which they discovered the difference, where you either like one type has more Jomon traits, maybe you can grow a deep beard that looks really cool, kind of have like a more square Western style face, and of course there's the more soft Yayoi genes, which are more closely related to Korean and mainland East Asian peoples. Now, back to Kabuki. So Kabuki developed basically because of sex workers working in... hello, viewer. How are you? There's sex workers working in Kyoto during the dry season, and one of them was a former shrine maiden, and she danced so much that... and slept around with their viewers, that the government then cracked out on them. So then the performers went from women performing to young boys doing that. But since Japanese samurai culture has a latent homosexual acceptance in like superior and inferior relationships, that got wiped out too, which is how you get to Kabuki today being... Oh, thank you, the archivist. I'm glad you're enjoying adult men performing the roles, which is how we have the performance today.
Yeah, and they have like dynasties of actors and players, right? Like I've seen a few shows, both YouTube and few places. Yoshitsune and the Thousand Trees, I think it is.
Yes.
Pretty well known one. But in the descriptions of the actors when they're being introduced, they're like, so and so the 15th or the 7th, and I thought that was really interesting.
This is
it turns out they have these huge dynasties of players and people, and I thought that was like etc.
Yes.
Ad nauseum. That's crazy.
That is actually how the Japanese world in art in general works. So not only in Kabuki, but you have that in No, you have that in Kyogen, and you have that in the fourth art that no one really... Japanese.
I know
puppet.
I know of it because someone was doing Star Wars productions with that old style of puppet. I can't remember the name of the style of puppetry, but I know what you're talking about.
Yes.
That is very exciting.
It is called Bunraku, and all of these people, all these arts have developed from parent passing it down to child, or one anime I recommend if you want to learn about how kabuki training in life is. So it's called Descending Stories, the Showa Genroku Rakugo Shinju. And it really shows you about, well, Rakugo, long story short, is Japanese comedic storytelling. And you have to be adopted by a performer if you're outside of the family to be trained in it. And there actually is a Western person from Canada, I believe, who has trained and spent years in the style, and he wants it to become a global phenomenon.
That's definitely very difficult if you have everyone being of the same family too. Family trees of how they pass on a certain art or a sacred or something that's traditional to their family, like a lot of the clans and things. But that's way before. But I'm very curious.
There is definitely a lineage to it. Of course, if you do not have a descendant, maybe you didn't take a wife or so on, you might adopt someone in to train. You can train. It's very, very. There's a long history, as you said, and it can date back generations, which is why you have these performers like something Monzaemon the 17th. So these people have been named continuously after, but these are not their personal names. These are their titles. Like, it's their performing name, which is why you can trace it back so long.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yes.
So instead of it being an actual person's name, it's actually more like just the title of Hamilton is played by so-and-so. That's more their player name.
Yes, really cool. It would be like if someone, like Lin-Manuel Miranda, had taken someone under his wing and then trained him, and then he retired, and he chose a different name in his retirement, and that guy took up the name like the second, the third, the fourth, and so on. That's how that works, is that as you rise through the ranks, because Japanese art also has ranks similar to kind of like martial arts. Yes. Okay. So you have to earn your rank, and typically the lower ranking people do kind of like the worst tasks. They're forced to take care of the home, feed things, take care of chores, whatever. Kind of like a hazing process, but it's the tradition that's been lasting well over 200 to 300 years at this point. Sometimes even 800 years.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So shifting into moving up a little further away from kabuki now, shifting into more the sides of the stagecraft of it and stage management.
Yes.
I was a theater kid for a long time, and I've done stage management with my mother on professional shows for Lucasfilm for a long time. And there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes of these shows, and like the costuming, all that kind of stuff.
Yes.
I mean, it's a crazy amount of preparation and stuff. And so I guess the further question I'm getting to is, how would you say preparation for those shows differs between that and a Broadway show or a Western theater show?
So first thing first.
If you can't comment.
Oh yes, absolutely, I can comment on it. So, what people need to realize is that all of these shows come from the structure of a stage one would perform on, usually at a shrine. Oftentimes, that's these dances and things what were evolved, mixed with music, and then story to create No. And of course, from No is sprung Kyogen, and then from No also is sprung Kabuki and then Bunraku with stories and things. But the structure of the stage is this. So, actually, the entrance of the people on the stage actually comes from behind the audience, and there is literally a wooden bridge that goes from behind the audience moving forward to the stage, where then you have different boxes where people use performances to create sound effects. Stage hands wear all black things. Maybe you might have seen they wear like a mask with a hat on top. Yes.
They do.
Yes. You'll see them most often in things like Bunraku, I was saying to you about the puppets.
Yeah.
So, like there's a person who controls the right arm, this person controls the left arm, this person controls the body. But mostly these people also dress the same style to control and keep in the shadows while the performers are out in front being very, very ostentatious. And
I see.
There you go. But you do have side entrances of things, and it's interesting. And that is a part of it, because you can also install things like trapdoors and things falling down from like above. It's really quite interesting that this it's such an elaborate stage production. And it's all built into the theater as is. So, and these are things that exist for, like, they've evolved over time.
And one other thing I've noticed within those performances there was a recent performance I watched, which was a fox about a drum that was made of his parents.
Right.
Yeah, grim subject there, but the fact that he could just drop down from the ceiling and then from a trap door and could just basically appear randomly. So I was very curious about that kind of stuff, and that really helped bridge the gap for me there.
Absolutely.
One other thing I've noticed when kabuki players enter, kind of continuing on with the stagecraft of this, is they will stop and do these very dedicated movements to stop into a pose. I've seen them do these mies, which is basically a big pose, kind of like if I describe a mie pose, someone is like Jiraiya from Naruto. I know there's always something corresponding to it in the famous part of the story. So what do these normally mean, or what do they present normally?
So basically, think of it like extremely exaggerated entrance for a hero. Jiraiya from the anime and manga Naruto is a wonderful example of the pastiche of what a kabuki actor does. More so, he is very. He is a great example of being the Aragoto style, because there are two main styles of kabuki: the Tokyo Wildman style. I forget what the Osakan style is, but it's more soft and sentimental because it's kind of more towards the traditional capital, where those ideals hold more stray. There's less samurai there, so they entertain more to the commoner people who kind of like that, nostalgia and romance sort of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But you're thinking of the thing where it's like they kind of like strike a pose, maybe their hands out, one's down here, their palms are showing, and one's up above their head. Maybe they're on one leg and they give like an intense stare, right?
Mm-hmm. Or sometimes they'll be holding a sword or a prop, usually, and
Yes.
strike a pose with that thing.
Yes, so this is an elaborate part of their entrance and dance. Dance is an extremely important part of this art form, and these poses give the dramatic thing. It would be like, so there you go. It's all about audience control and using these moments to get a feeling of, oh, wow, here's our hero, or oh, here's our villain, or oh, I feel so sad. It's like
character, as it were.
yes.
Like certain heroes will have certain facial masks or coloring on their eyes or their face. What do you know about that kind of stuff? As far as like, how do you know who's a hero, who's a villain? Is it like a color coding system? Is there some way their costumes are different?
Yes. So I will answer your question, and then I have a question from our stream chat that I will answer following that. So to answer your question, Hassion, is this. So, colors are absolutely integral to characters. For example, if you have a more villainous character, purple is a very, very, very common theme, whereas red is a very masculine, strong, energetic color, which again, I'm going to point to Jiraiya, and actually a good counterbalance would be Orochimaru. Now, they're actually from a story that's very, very popular folktale that has become, I think, a large part of the Japanese mythology that's actually rather recent, which is the story of the gallant Jiraiya, who is a toad mage who fights his former apprentice in a revenge plot against someone who killed his dad, that being Jiraiya's father. Now,
That's crazy.
Oftentimes, these negative characters have kind of more shading in their thing. They look down to look more sinister. They have purple lines on their face. And of course, people like Jiraiya, the more hero, the more energetic warrior, they have red. They're very exaggerated. They look intense, like they're going to have a big battle, like blood's flowing to their face. That is what these colors evoke.
Okay.
Now, to the archivist. Are Kabuki Rakugo, etc. popular? And are they treated as higher art that isn't popularized? It depends. So, typically, older generations follow these things instead of the younger generation. But based on outreach and more people becoming knowledgeable about Japanese traditional culture, it's becoming more popular there. Anime is doing a wonderful job of doing that. But we're seeing this because different stage productions and places are actually increasingly having availability of headsets and kind of pamphlets that tell you what's going on in the play, and it translates it as the actors are saying it. So it is becoming more popular with an outside audience. For maybe you don't follow it. Of course, most of these actors also do various dramas as well. Like these Bonsai on the 17th. They actually take part in like NHK big historical dramas or other such things. So they're a part of the popular conscious as well when they're not doing their traditional roles. I hope that answered your question, the archivist. Now back to you, Hasyan.
Yeah, so it's definitely a lot to take in, though.
Yeah.
As far as Kabuki in between this and then the counterpart to No, though, is that No uses masks only usually.
Yes.
And it's kind of a big difference between them. Why doesn't Kabuki use more masks? I mean, they use some of them,
Right.
but mostly the makeup they use. So is there a bigger difference between No and Kabuki, and why do they use masks?
No is a very, very, very slow, very, very slow art compared to Kabuki. So when you're watching No, not only do you understand, but the movement is very, very controlled and precise. And the masks are what they use to convey emotion. So this is where the Japanese ideal of lighting and shadow comes in. If you want to read an interesting book about why Japanese art really contextualizes the use of shadow, I recommend a book by Junichiro Tanizaki, who basically became very obsessed. He was very obsessed with traditional Japanese culture, and he was one of the major writers of Japanese modern literature. Probably one of the most well-known. He's certainly my favorite modern Japanese writer. Modern being from when Japan opened up to the world to probably the 1950s and 60s. And he...
Long time.
Yeah, it is a long time. It's a period of 100 years, give or take. Time is much larger than usually we think of, you know? That's the interesting thing about history. So let's see.
Absolutely.
Here. I'm going to try and find the book for everybody so that they can look at it. All right, let's see.
I definitely would be curious to get a copy of it myself, so I
Yes.
definitely will look into that.
So it is available usually at Barnes & Noble's in the literature section. So his book is called In Praise of Shadows. That's the book in talking about the importance of shadow in performance in Japanese culture. Of course, he also wrote some interesting things like Naomi, and his main work is the Makioka sisters. This is the thing that he was most famous for outside of Japan. Basically, it's like the middle-class life of Japanese people. So Osamu Dazai, the archivist says, he is another great Japanese writer. Unfortunately, he committed suicide, which is...
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah, well, that's the problem, is that a lot of artists in Japan, the emotions are really strong, so it's key to focus on. But
Definitely.
yes, I actually need to read more Osamu Dazai myself. I have one on my Kindle device, but as of this moment, I'm working on other books to read right now. Now, going back to the masks. So the masks are extremely important and know for conveying emotion. So these masks have their own artwork to them that also goes back generations of carving them and latticing them, making them lacquered and such. It's very interesting. Now, your head's position based on how you're looking to the audience shows what emotion you show. For example, let's say your head's pointed down. This covers your eyes, and it kind of makes it look more gruesome and angry. Maybe you turn your head up a little bit and you look like you're laughing or you're happy. That's the intricacy of the masks. Kabuki just decided that that's not so good because it's a more energetic style. So a mask would not be probably good if you're just going to fly off your face when you're doing a crazy dance.
No, it probably would not.
Yeah.
So I've talked a lot about the more historical side of the arts here. Moving to the modern side of it, I know that a lot of kabuki plays have started to more popularize more pop culture things, like Naruto. They actually recently did a summer play, I think in 2018,
Yes.
which was pretty popular. Do you think they'll keep modernizing and keep making newer pop culture things into kabuki plays? Or do you think that's kind of, it's a one-off because it's really popular?
No, I think that's going to keep happening. I believe that art is constantly evolving as such. For example, I believe 2 years ago in 2019, there was a One Piece kabuki that was performed. Yeah, if you're in the chat, you can see here it's a picture of Monkey D. Luffy, white makeup. His outfit is red. There's a lot of furs to make it seem grown in, and it's a long list of men drawn together, the cast and so on. It's really interesting, and I can see that moving forward, and I believe that will absolutely capture an audience with people outside of Japan, because most people know Japanese pop culture, but less people know about Japanese traditional art culture.
Absolutely. I'm very excited to see that kind of stuff happen and see more of that get unveiled to people. I love a lot of theater stuff, and I love just cultural things. It's
Yes.
neat stuff. Into which that kind of segues into my next topic, which is the
Yes.
museums of Japan. A friend of mine went to Japan recently, and he brought back stuff for the Samurai Museum, and
Mm,
I got a little figurine, so which is really neat.
right.
So of I think it was a Katsumoto, and that was really neat. Um, just because it's a neat culture, and Bushido's always been talked about, and it's a very masculine thing. But the things they don't really talk about are more of like, you know, the art of samurai and things that they did, because they do also like they have lots of other arts, not just from, writing, but also like their sword practices can be considered an art form as well to some.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really neat stuff to think about, because art can be contextualized in a number of things. Too is what are some of your favorite museums you've been to, or ones you've been able to see, and what are they covering as far as subjects?
Okay. So, unfortunately, I have not had too many opportunities to go to museums, although one that I did go to is the Kyoto Manga Museum during my stay in 2017. That's a wonderful museum. You can walk around through the history of how manga was created in Japanese society, what it evolved from versus where it's going. And it's also a massive library with not only Japanese but English manga as well to be read by anyone. Um, Other museums I would recommend that I did not get to go to is I highly recommend any of the national museums in Ueno Park, as well as I would say, of course, the Kyoto Manga Museum is wonderful. Any museums in major cities are pretty good, as well as, just I'm trying to think. I don't know, my friend. I think that's basically it.
That's a very tough subject if you haven't been able to go to any of them.
Yeah.
And with the way the world is currently, that's a pretty difficult prospect at best.
Yes.
So I guess we'll move further along here with this. And
The Tokyo Parasite Museum. And it is entirely dedicated to the study of different types of parasites that can exist in the human body. From what I hear, it's one of the most disgusting museums you can go to, but one of the most interesting, and I highly recommend going to that as well.
that sounds really interesting, but also pretty gross.
Mm-hmm.
It's important stuff. It's good to study that kind of stuff. I was about to actually just shift into the topic of
Right.
the more cultural significance of their advancements that I feel a lot of Western countries kind of sleep on.
Right.
I really feel like the U.S. especially is sleeping on light rail as far
Yes.
as like what it could do, especially if like you could make. I mean, airlines, while useful, I mean, if you could have a light rail between us and New York, I think it used all the time,
Mm-hmm.
and I definitely feel like people need to get up on to advance to a more, I say cultural, but also technological advancement to let people have more access to the internet, computers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of things are more readily available in Tokyo and other
Okay.
areas. So
Yes.
with that, I definitely want to see your opinions on the technology in Japan, or what you've been able to see with their more advanced stuff. Because I know they have a lot of lights, glitz, and glam, but they've got a lot of really neat stuff too, as far as like their advancements in like rails, other things, etc.
Yes. So, in terms of, do you want to start with like trains? Is that what we
Yeah,
want to start with? Okay,
we'll
you're
start.
starting me off on a topic that I personally love. I love trains. I like driving to be sure, but trains are so useful because you can basically do anything while sitting on your butt, not having to focus on not dying while behind a vehicle.
Hmm.
um, and the use of them is very nice. Uh, Japanese trains are some of the most efficient in the world. And to the fact that jokes aside, if you're on the rush hour and you miss your train or it's late by a couple seconds, the train station will literally give you a card explaining why you are late to your boss. And they can contact the
That's pretty
train.
sweet.
It is. And they have rail going everywhere through a use of heavy rail, light rail, as well as subway systems, um, as well as different types of like trolleys and what have you. And of course, they have buses too. It's extremely useful because these stations often have different train lines in the same station, or maybe you might have, for example, one of my favorite stations in Japan, whose name I forget, but going there I thought it was very efficient. They have a bus stop with 4 different buses able to line up, going to different areas. Right next to that, they have a entrance to the subway that can get you around local areas, but then you can also take maybe the Japan Rail or maybe a private light rail line as well. It's the fact that they have so many available options to travel around with and being on your feet. This allows you to be on your feet all the time. That it's great. And America is really missing out on this. They could be utilizing a lot to do so. I've seen a lot of rail lines throughout different cities in SoCal when I used to live there that could absolutely be retrofitted to connect to main lines and be used, like, let's say you want to stop in Southern California. There's a city called Tustin. There is a train station there, and maybe they could connect to that train station a light rail line that goes through the city of Irvine, going down to the southern part of the county. That would service people not only to get to their jobs, but they could live at other places.
Most definitely.
Yeah, and individual cars stacking up on top of each other, which is where a lot
Most
of our
definitely.
pollution comes from.
Absolutely, and as that's a fun topic to discuss is carbon emissions, that fun stuff.
Yes.
But I mean, I definitely think a light rail going up the one freeway, even that would be quite the project. But in previous podcasts, you talked about jobs and the job climate and stuff. I think you could make a ton of jobs through public works, kind of like FDR did, and the New Deal type deals with
Yes.
light rail projects. I feel like we
Yes.
could really modernize the country with those, and even
Yes.
like Japan could even bid on those contracts. Maybe who knows? Why not let the people who know how to do it, do what they do best?
Yes,
Um,
I completely agree with you. I think that is something that needs to be considered. Unfortunately, there's so much gridlock and just kind of just wasting of time for people that unfortunately it just gets held back. Or else I definitely feel as if public transportation could be revolutionized in the United States of America. But you also just need an option. I do agree that a public works program, the likes of which would probably be much, much, much larger than what FDR did, to do so. It would be akin to what Eisenhower did when he created the national highway system that we have today, the freeway. That didn't used to be a thing
Yep.
until the 50s. So there you
Nope.
go.
I definitely think it's got a shot at it. Not to mention with all these other jobs and people from the southern areas. I mean, they have a strong history and connection to the railroad. I feel like they could find more jobs. Starts to bridge the gap there between those disparities.
To be
But
fair, Halcyon, America is kind of stuck in its ways, the country. So
yes, but there are times when they have modernized for the convenience of others, like you said, the highway system, etc.
yes,
Um,
yes, you can
and that brings
think.
me into
Go ahead.
the next topic, which is technology,
Mm-hmm.
and mega corporations, etc.
Uh-huh.
I recently left a technology firm that I worked for about 2 years for a new American-owned company,
Yes.
and it's very exciting for me, which I'm excited about. But the question
Congratulations.
is, I guess, since everyone's stuck in their own ways, and you talked about brush briefly on a few other podcasts, but as far as technology, where do you think it's going to go? As far as like, do you think we'll have better VR tech, or do you think we're going to go into, the Matrix kind of stuff, or do you think we're just going to have just better and better like cyberpunk kind of deals, or where do you think this is heading as far as like technology?
Where are we that are typically was seen as lower middle class, production, manufacturing, and so on, probably even into service. We might get into like technology becoming so good it's tests it in cooking and so on. People think that's a dangerous thing. Guys, it's not dangerous. It's wonderful. Because AI doing all of this stuff for you. You know what that means? You're going to be free to do whatever the heck you want. Because probably what's going to happen is the governments will have to step in and tax the living heck out of a company or thing that can exist for 24 hours, 7 days a week. And that'll allow us to it'll be a cultural revolution. In the sense
Not to
that,
mention get rid of more dangerous jobs too.
yes, Yes, because ultimately, these pieces of technology, these things that will develop, will ultimately be able to take the dangerous jobs, and it will allow people to develop new things. They can develop new careers. I am very much an optimist in that sense. I'm not of the doom and gloom of Elon Musk's variety that this is a bad thing. I honestly think the reason the tech world doesn't want this to happen is because they want to keep the current model of exploitative corporate capitalism in check that they have benefited on. But at the end of the day, I believe that we will move forward and we will advance as a species and a planet as long as the wrong people don't get in charge and
Most definitely.
mess it up for everybody.
Thank you, Buzz the Arcanist. Definitely agree. Trains are a fantastic transportation method. Most definitely.
Yes, I saw that. I had a smile.
So with that, kind of shifting into the topic of things as far as technology and things, leisure,
Yes.
because that also, like you mentioned, because people will be able to pursue their passions and things. I love me a good tabletop. I know Matt briefly touched on it in a previous podcast as well. I've been playing tabletop board games since I was about 8 years old.
Right.
And love them to death. They're fantastic. So I want to get your pick of the brain, picks of the brain here of what do you greatly enjoy about tabletop role playing games? And that's more the what do you enjoy about it? Because I know you mentioned the role playing and all that kind of stuff, but is there mechanically things you enjoy as far as like your time spent doing it?
It's the fact that I spend time with friends, and basically it's use of my acting experience. You said you were in theater, I was as well, and there you go. So that's what's needed to be done. Is that it's acting, but it's also having a good time with your mates, and it's community based. So you get a lot of joy out of that. There's a lot of aspects of tabletop gaming that I think is fun that I feel like video games don't really hack into because that's become a very toxic online thing. And I think so. Oh, Archivice, I believe the main issue people have is that there's a precariat that won't be able to shift into new professions without further education. That's why we need to make that the archivist. That's why we needed to make education available so that they can future-proof themselves. That's why I didn't get a law degree. I'm sorry. That was beforehand. That's why I didn't get a thing like a business degree. There's too many business majors in the world. That's why I didn't get a thing like a chemist degree to go to like or science or IT. All those job markets are going to get glutted by all these people who do it. The competition gets worse, the pay goes down, and so on because these are highly valued, knowledgeable things. I chose history because I ultimately believe that a majority of the people teaching history today are all in their 60s, 70s, and 80s at this point. And once that happens, I'm going to be in the market for a job, if I were to do so. It's all about strategic planning. Now, going back to tabletop gaming is just a wonderful way to spend time and hang out with friends in a setting that doesn't require you to leave the comfort of your home or a comfort zone that's uncomfortable, like maybe a bar or a club. It's just another avenue for people to enjoy their company of each other.
Definitely. And shifting into the topic of competitive gaming and whatnot,
yes,
as far as it goes, I know you're not much for competitions and things, that kind of stuff. Do you want to get into it, or is it more something you leave to the others?
I like the art.
You make really pretty art. That is absolutely
it's very pretty
hands down
art.
One of the best art.
Yes, that's about it. I get the appeal. It's collecting, and it's using that, and it's strategy. I understand why people enjoy it as a hobby. It's just not for me. But that's not true because when I play WoW, I'm a mount collector, so I'm kind of like a bit of a, what is the word I want to use? A hypocrite? I'm a bit of a hypocrite in that because I'm essentially collecting.
There's a lot of ways of doing that.
That's true.
Of course, I'm also asking these questions as I'm opening a pack of magic cards.
And share things with each other together in person.
As I'm crinkling through the paper and things, I enjoy that. Granted, I'm going to play a pickup game because no shop is nearby open to me.
Right.
Online play has been really good, but as far as the cards go, I like opening the packs, to be honest. Like that's one of the things I enjoy about it. Same with like the collectible miniatures for like D&D and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I have a huge collection. I think a little over, just shy of 4,000 miniatures. Yes, that's a terrible use of money. I'm aware. But it's for like the only one hobby I greatly enjoy. So
listen,
I feel it's a justified expense for my terrain miniatures and other things.
Hassan, it's wonderful that you do that. You are stimulating the economy and making it so that artists, creatives, and so on can continue to pursue their passions to bring you entertainment. If you didn't buy those cards, if you didn't buy those things and engage with people, that industry would crash. So you are helping an industry that is legitimately helping probably normal thing. He asks, Euro games or Ameritrash? Never ending question.
It indeed is.
Video. I'm assuming we're talking about European-made games versus American games online. In which case, there are certain American games I enjoy and don't enjoy. There are certain European games I enjoy and don't enjoy. It's all just depends on the content, which is why I watch Let's Players so I don't waste my money.
Definitely a smart plan. Also, there's a lot of really good European developed board games and things. I feel like a lot of American people sleep on 'cause it's like, well, I just don't really know what this is because I don't know how to play it yet. And it's like, but there's so many good choices and so many things you could do
Absolutely.
from people that come from other styles and walks of life for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Great question, though.
It's a wonderful question. Yes.
As far as the rest of that goes, shifting into the further topics, though,
right.
Completely. The rest of my list here. So, with that, I guess we'll shift into the matter of hobbies and things, because you mentioned you have quite a few.
Yes.
What are your current pursuits, aside from the poetry and aside from the other things? Are you looking to advance yourself in any kind of skill or train yourself in a new form or hobby? Myself, I keep myself pretty busy with a lot of different types of hobbies.
Enjoy, and it builds you as a person. It makes you more well-rounded. For myself, oh my goodness gracious, I read like my eyes are going to burn out of my head, and I need to use as much time as possible to read. That's what I do with there. I love me reading. I love my reading. I love my reading. I'm going to say it 3 times. It's the emphasis there.
You definitely should. I mean, much like the Air from Twilight Zone, don't wait till the last minute because you think you'll have time, and then you won't.
Exactly. It's better to do it now rather than later, because later will just become tomorrow, and we never get to tomorrow because it's always today.
Correct. So, shifting back into the tabletop a little bit lastly, of Japanese board games and things, there's lots of them like Go, and a few other types of styles of board games and things. Do you play any of the more traditional board games and things, or do you tend to kind of leave those be because they're just a little more old-fashioned?
I'll be honest.
Like shogi and whatnot.
Yeah. The fact you bring up shogi is interesting, because Go seems like it would be fun, but I just don't. It's like I haven't tried it, or well, I've tried an online match of it, and it just wasn't that entertaining. But I've thought of getting into shogi, and I've thought of getting into chess, or if you're talking about traditional tabletop games and the like. So yeah.
That is an excellent idea, and I'll play you in a pickup match sometime. Maybe that could be a stream you do one day as we learn shogi.
I would love to do that. That would be fun. That could just be a.
But Taisho, which is from the Avatar: The Last Airbender, is a real board game now. People have made tiles, they've made boards, and I own actually the rule set to Scud Taisho, which is the document you can pick up. It's free.
Right.
And it's a really interesting little board game. It mixes a lot of different things together, which is really neat. It's got the piece capturing of chess. It's got the momentum of Go. It's got a lot of really weird stuff together.
Yes, I would absolutely play Taisho. I feel like I already give off a very Iroh-esque vibe, and I would love to play it. I got the paunch. I got the good values. I like my tea. I make jasmine tea, which is his favorite. It's not hot leaf juice. Dang it! It is a wonderful beverage in and of itself. But yes, I would absolutely.
I'll see if I can find that. We can do a stream of that too someday.
That would be fun. Of course, I would probably have to pick up that instruction list, because I wouldn't know what I'm doing.
Definitely, and if you want, I can get you the copy of the rules. You can post it in the comments down below later for people to check it out. It's a fun game. It's a lot of fun with friends. And if you ever build a board with your buddies, like you could trade in the White Lotus tile all day.
There you go. It'll be our little inn. He is a wise man who knows the way. Yeah, so I would definitely pick that up. Are there any type of traditional board games you'd look into, or maybe fantasy game? I believe it is called. What is it? Game of Thrones board. It's probably gonna take me to like the board game of. I'm trying to think. They have an actual thing it's the equivalent of chess, but instead of pieces like the rook or the bishop or so on.
No, but I don't quite know if they have a rule set.
Exactly.
I'm certain some Game of Thrones fan will come to us and say like, yeah, there's rules of it, and this book for George R. R. Martin. I'm certain.
Yeah.
But no, I was unfamiliar that they have a rule set for this board game.
Yeah, it's something that like I read a lot. I read a lot of fan fiction as well as books of fictional and non-fictional variety, and that board game comes up a lot. Oh wait, I think I know what it's called. I'm gonna type it in to the top here. Yep, literally right there. Savas. Oh my goodness! And people have made sets of it, and that's okay. Oh, I'm looking. I'm gonna look at the pictures now. That's amazing. Look, it's got like peaks and warriors, dragons, mountains. The board game is literally the board itself is literally like a chessboard with 2 dragons on both ends. That's amazing. I would play this.
Yeah.
Oh, there you
Absolutely. That looks. Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, Savas
right.
Online. There you go. So you can actually play this online with people. Very nice.
We'll have to do like a fantasy board game day where we play things from different shows and things.
Absolutely, I would be down. I guess I need to look into different franchises. I hear Ursula Le Guin has a wonderful set of different fantasy novels that I'm sure she's made some fake games into it as well, and other fantasy and sci-fi writers too.
And definitely, if people have board games, I'd be down to just try anything.
Yeah.
So if people want to send you stuff, that'd be cool too.
Speaking of board games, apparently the archivist was talking about tabletop games instead of video games. He brought up things like Agricola, the Vinos, or things like Gloomhaven or Eldritch. Yeah, listen. If it's a good board game, I'm down to play it. I don't care.
I'm definitely a man for Arkham horrors, and I definitely enjoy some Call of Cthulhu now and again.
There you go.
And I enjoy the storytelling aspect of it too. I mean, for me, I'm very much an amateur writer. I definitely do not, subject my players to content I'm writing.
Yes.
Because it's what you do. There's definitely lots of stories you can tell with these types of board games, and I'm not there for the crunch of D&D. I'm there for like the fun things that my players can do and excite me with, versus what I could tell them a story. I'm not reading a novel to them; they're there making it happen. So
absolutely,
very much in that kind of approach.
I think that's
definitely a good one, archivist.
Wonderful. So.
All right. Well, with that kind of stuff. Is there any other things as far as, do you do any cosplay or costuming? I do like the 501st and other Star Wars costuming groups,
yes.
But do you do anything currently, or like have any plans to do it in like 2021 or 2023 when conventions become a thing, maybe?
I'll be honest. I don't think. Okay. Apparently, the archivist says for recommendations, he says to try TAFL, TAFL, as a traditional game for us to try. We will mark that in as something to try. The archivist, thank you. Back to your question, Hassion. I don't do cosplay. I think I would like to get into it, but right now it's just not in the cards. I don't think I'm going to be going to any conventions at all this year as well. I'm just a little too hesitant.
Yeah.
Even with the vaccines, the spread of the variants and the different things kind of traveling around. Again, there's a reason why my podcast is called The Guy in the Basement Podcast. I want to be here for a good amount of time. So.
And that's perfectly legitimate.
Yes. Now, I would like to go back, but probably more so, I would like to get into art. And drawing. I used to be a painter. I used to paint things. And of course I write the poems, and I have 3 to 4 different novel ideas I'm working through, although I'm working on my kind of 1800s American goes and travels the world and visits different cultures and finds different like secret esoteric things hidden under the veneer of society, and he goes on adventures in that kind of way. Yeah, I'm very good at world building. It's when I put it to paper that I'm not so good. I'm a great ideas man. I'm very bad at implementation.
Something that may help you in the writing method is ask questions the character would ask, and then you can answer those questions for him. Just imagine he's talking to you about some stuff.
Right.
It really helps me trying to figure out, like, what are these people known for? Like, what do they do? How are they different? What are the cultural norms? I'm out of town. What's the thing to do here? Oh, they got this kind of game they all play on this one day. It's like a, volleyball meets deathmatch. It's just
well,
totally depends on what you need to do. That might help you out.
Definitely a great thank you for the writing advice. I really appreciate it. The archivist. I post poetry to my Instagram account and to my private Facebook account. If you would like, in the description links, you'll be able to see links to my Twitter, my Wagon Meister, both my Wagon Meister Twitter and Facebook, but also my personal Instagram. I often post Instagram poems on Instagram in the description while taking pictures of things when I thought of it. I believe in inspiration as the driving tool for creating those poems, so it can be spotty. But you can definitely read my poetry either on Instagram is my recommendation, which again is in the links below in the doobly-doo. So, there you go.
All right.
Yes.
So, aside from these other things, I guess we're just gonna randomly topic shift again to TV.
Uh-huh.
Are there any current things you're catching up with as far as like? I know Japan TV can be really hit or miss sometimes for Western audiences. Did you follow any big shows that are quote like big in Japan but not really here in the West?
Yes. Since I like history, I'm very interested in Japanese historical dramas.
Got any recommendations? I've been looking for some.
Good recommendations. If you want good recommendations, I point you to the NHK's Taiga dramas. These are year-long historical dramas based on Japanese historical figures. And for example, last year, name of the guy. It's surprising that I can't think of it, but then again, today I woke up at 1 in the morning and I stayed awake the whole time. Just couldn't fall back asleep. So my brain is preparing its synapses and it's firing and it's working so hard. And I can picture the guy and I can even think of his symbol. So, okay, so I'm just gonna look up one of the most. Okay, there we are. So, the last year's drama was on Akechi Mitsuhide, who is the person who ended up killing Oda Nobunaga in a temple while he was having a good time, before then getting killed by Toyotomi Hideyoshi. So he was actually known as the 13-day shogun, and then he's obviously was killed after 13 days. Not a very good lifespan. Yeah.
No, the Sengoku period is pretty rough and tough to be there with a lot of the players.
Exactly.
At least if for any like meaningful clan or power structure there.
Very true. Yeah, let me give you some different Taiga dramas to recommend. Speaking of other things, though, I have been watching currently with my mom the series Dark on Netflix. I believe it's been described as an adult German Stranger Things.
Interesting. I'll definitely have to check that out. Recommendations for you that I've currently been keeping up with is Peaky Blinders if you're a fan of British television. It's a fantastic show. If not, I would probably recommend I think it's called Strangers in the Woods or it's Robbers in the Woods. But it's another German television show about Jan de Licht and a band of thieves he runs and things of that nature, which is very it's very interesting. It's 14th century France. It's a neat show. It's very historical drama for that kind of stuff, but it's a neat little thing about it. A little hamlet in France during the 14th or 13th century.
Interesting. Yeah, I've actually watched a couple episodes of Peaky Blinders and then I fell off, but it's something I want to get back into because it seems very interesting.
Covers a very interesting time, which is right after World War One, and all the veterans are coming home to the land of heroes and all that kind of stuff, and it's not quite the opportune time that they think it's going to be.
Very true, and that's genuinely it's a genuinely interesting series to get at. Then, yes.
So, speaking of which, that time that's just a fun history place because Japan was involved during like the Russo-Japanese War and that kind of stuff. Not to mention, it's around that time, acquired during their
the Germans. Just call it as
the
it
tenure.
is. Yes.
Yeah.
We call them the Solomon Islands today.
They do, but my question is, like, what was the climate like back for them? Because I mean, like for Britain, it was pretty terrible. Like veterans would get hired, nobody liked them very much. It was kind of like this almost societal bore or drain on the war. Since it wasn't this glorious adventure for the British. I'm very curious with like the
Japanese
Bushido / the overarching cultural implications because for Japanese men it could be a kind of a man's man thing to do war, but also kind of not because I mean a lot of philosophers
totally
in the
different,
samurai thing for
totally different culture.
totally.
You're totally different culture in the late 1910s and the 20s, early 20s. So, Japan at that time, the Meiji Emperor, the person who had industrialized, who was the head of the Japanese state when industrializing Japan, passed away in 1910. His son, who would become the Emperor Hirohito, he got his training by being a regent for his father. But this was called the Taisho Democracy. It was when democratic, to all men, it was given suffrage. There was increasing democratic oversight of the government from this kind of oligarchical system. And the economy was booming because Japan was just selling hotcakes amounts of stuff to the Allies. And of course, they fought in China and captured Tsingtao, where the Germans controlled their little territory. And of course, they captured the islands from the Germans back in 1915, if you could believe it. So they were actually fighting in the war before America was. Now, following this, because the war died down, peace was, and then various different things of tragedy happened to the Japanese. Of course, in 1920, I'm just going to look up. It's the Great Kanto earthquake. It's the beginning of the troubles for Japan. There you go. In 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake happens, flattens all of old Tokyo, and then, of course, the bombing campaign by the Americans over Tokyo in the 40s, of course, destroys the rest of traditional Tokyo. Traditional Tokyo and the Tokyo that had been created by the point of coming back from this earthquake and kind of when they industrialized and became a modern nation state. People were optimistic. It was a glowing time. Think of it like the roaring 20s for Japan up until that earthquake. And then economic shock after economic shock. The Taiwanese, because Taiwan was a Japanese colony at that point, Taiwan's national bank, its regional bank, shut down. They had to save it. That didn't work out. More people started pulling money out of the bank. And there was a very bad economic depression for years before the Great Depression, and that was even worse. Kept pulling money out. Far right wingers started coming into power because people were blaming corporations for greediness, which, of course, if you've ever heard of the term zaibatsu, it is a term to refer to a corporation that does a lot of different stuff. For example, Mitsubishi was into manufacturing. They also did other stuff. They had a bank. They had different things. Same with, it kept stacking onto the Japanese, and it kept getting worse and worse for them. And of course, they entered into fascist state. But unlike Nazi Germany and fascist Italy, the military is who took charge as opposed to politicians. The only way you could stop the military in Japan, because it was not resolved in the constitution to that point, was the emperor had to take charge. They directly reported to him, and of course there was a distance between even the military government and the emperor, even though they're kind of following his orders, and so on and so forth. That's what happened.
I see.
Yeah.
Welcome, Zalist, by the way. Welcome to the stream.
Yes. Welcome. Thank you for saying. It's great. I would highly recommend, if you want to learn about this post-World War I period, the autobiographical and societal tale by Mizuki Shigeru, who invented the anime character Gegege no Kitaro. He basically made a manga that is autobiographical and tells the story of Japan from this Great Kanto earthquake till about the end of the Showa period in 89. And it's really good if you want to learn about how Japanese society kind of worked and how it was to be such a person living in those times. People were hungry, jobs were scarce, and so on for the emperor. Really some dark stuff. But it's really good because it's a great tale if you're a pacifist to give you this this is why war is not good.
Most definitely. It's a neat concept and idea. Yeah. I actually had a question, because you brought up an interesting thing. Or do they still have like certain periods, like the 1900s? Do they still call that an era?
What they do is, um, before the emperor came back into power in 1868, it was known, Japanese history is known in periods based around massive societal things. Of course, you have the Edo period because Edo was central, and that was before the modern period. It's actually early modern Japan, if when you look at things such as that. Um, the archivist,
Forgive me. It looks like a archivist had a question, by the way, about the
yes,
lost decade.
we can get to
So,
that after I explain
of course.
the era system. So before that, you have these large reaching things. So before Edo, there was the Warring States period. Before the Warring States period, there was the Muromachi period, where the shogun lived and controlled things in Kyoto. Before that, there was a period of fighting between the emperor, who wanted to control the state again, and the first group of shoguns in Kamakura. Then the Kamakura period. Keep going back. Then there's the Heian period in classical Kyoto, Nara period. And basically, you're getting more and more tribal and smaller states, where not all of Japan was emperor's reign name. So you have Meiji, you have Taisho, and then you have, Showa, which is Emperor Hirohito. And then we had Heisei, which was the emperor who just retired a couple of years ago. And of course, his son now is the Reiwa emperor. He has a real name given to him, but his reign name when he dies will be referred to as his period name.
Okay.
Now,
makes a lot more sense.
Yes. It's confusing until it gets explained. It's like, big periods of 4 decades at this point, 3 decades. Basically, the lost decade refers to how the Japanese economy's bubble popped in the early 90s, and that they lost economic progress and expansion moving forward. Basically, the Japanese market was so overinflated that when it popped and depressed, it has, even to today, yet to recover to the levels it was at. Back before the bubble popped, a house in Tokyo would be worth 5 different mansions in Beverly Hills, probably. But that land isn't actually that expensive. So as you can tell, it was artificial inflation mixed with positive investment of the economy to move forward. How's it going? It's getting better, and Japan's economically stable. But to be perfectly frank, Japan's economy is as big as it can be unless they start to overwhelmingly increase the birth rate or they allow a lot more immigration in. Neither options. One is still today laughed about, and that would be immigration. And the other is really difficult because when your country is doing economically poorly, birth rates tend to statistically lower because no one wants to bring a child in, lower their cost of living by having to share it around by supporting said child, and so on. That's why we're seeing right now, because the economy's bad because of COVID-19 slowing it and losing production, that there is not a baby boom right now like people expected because of COVID. So there you go. I don't get to really flex my economic and socio-historical and such muscle much, so it's really nice to answer such a question. Sorry about that.
So actually, that's a great. No, that's wonderful. That's a good piggyback onto the next topic I was going to look into. Is as far as economics, the difference between American economics and Japanese economics. We're very
Right.
Wall Street centric. Is there kind of like a Japanese Wall Street, or is there more just like large banks do a lot of money, or how do they do that? What's their system like?
Yeah, there is a Japanese Wall Street. It is called the Nikkei Index, and it lists probably like of 225 large publicly owned companies, very similar how to the Standard & Poor of America or the NASDAQ. So
Nice.
There you go. As for investment, Japan is a country that, unlike in America, where it kind of only goes to big manufacturers of war machines or so on, what people call the military-industrial complex. Old Eisenhower brought it about, and it is really true. He was right; his prediction was on the money, but no one wants to talk about it. And if you point it out, usually the people end up getting killed. But I mean, if I get killed after this, something happens to me. Well, I brought it to the forebear, and people can look at this. But yeah, it's more balanced. I feel like Japan is the great example of how far a liberal democracy can get in terms of balancing capitalist policies with socialistic welfare system and so on. And you can only reach a certain point before that collapses, like Japan did in the 90s with their economy. And moving forward, you're probably going to have to focus on pushing towards a more socialistic agenda to stabilize the economic model that's based off of booming and busting. And when we have booms, it's great, but when we have busts, we always wonder why, but it's the same latent problems that existed, for hundreds of years.
Mm-hmm. So kind of swung back to the idea of the immigration idea and policy.
Right.
I definitely, being a gaijin ourselves, maybe not yourself because you've immigrated there a few times. Not immigrated.
Well,
but
I'm not immigrated.
there.
I've worked there. No, I'm definitely
Yeah.
a gaijin. I understand the culture and the history. That doesn't make me less of a gaijin.
That's fair. But I guess my question is, why is it so laughed at? Is it more just the isolationist tendencies of Japan? Is it more like... I mean, I'm sure a billion other podcast things have tried to talk and cover this idea, but
Right.
what are your personal opinions on
Yeah.
the gaijin problem for Japan? Is it just an idea of it's unheard of, or is it just a lack of want? Is it just that we're too
I think
strange to them?
it's not that they're strange. More and more foreigners are coming to Japan in the form of people from Brazil, from Southeast Asia, etc. But it's a mix of things. One, there's a sort of Japanese, I don't want to say arrogance, but their language is complicated, but they feel like it's so complicated no one will want to learn it. I think that's incorrect because there's a lot of people who have private efforts to do so to move there. Another being
Absolutely.
they feel like non-Japanese people won't be able to come into Japan and what is the word I want to use?
Thrive?
Not thrive. It's incorporate themselves into the society. There's a word for
assimilation.
it. Yeah, they think that it'll
assimilate.
be too hard for them to assimilate to Japanese ways of life, which again, it's not going to be a problem for the kids because the kids will grow up in Japan. They'll probably speak Japanese better than their parents and so on. That's the story of most immigrant stories. And I also feel like they're scared because they feel like it might taint their culture, which has been quote unquote pure Yamato Dashi, Damashi. It's like Japanese spirit or Japanese society, Japanese bunka, Nihon no bunka. And maybe they feel a little too overprotective of that. I just think I think that they need to do it. It's not a question. It's one of the reasons that Europe and America, the United States, and Canada as well, basically Western countries have continued to perform as well as they do. Immigration has a net gain to the economy. There's more people paying taxes. There's more people engaging and filling in jobs in the economy, which causes more production, more ability to things be produced and sold. And it's a positive thing. When you strive against it, what you're doing is you're economically crippling yourself as a country. But if you tend to be a more conservative population, which Japan is fairly conservative in a lot of aspects of its society, and other aspects are liberal, it can be a detriment.
Definitely. I mean, there's also this, not a space issue, but Japan's very built up as far as they've gone.
Yeah.
But with disasters and things like the Fukushima disaster and lots of other problems cutting off large swaths of land, they're working on it, most definitely.
Yeah.
Until that type of land is re-available or made available again to its residents and people, I definitely feel like that also kind of helps hobble the problem of there's just not a lot of space on Japan. It's not a tiny island, but it's got only so much space to go around, and I definitely think that might be also a play on it.
Right. But here's the thing: Japan is fairly densely populated, but those are typically in large metropolitan areas. If you go out into the countryside, half those houses that you would drive past, usually they're kind of collapsing in on themselves. The government literally buys them and then gives them for free to people to live out there as long as they pay for it to be renovated and then create business out there, which is a trend that seems to be increasing because of the panic of the virus and being close to each other, and the fact that living in places like Tokyo or Osaka, since it's so compact and focused on fitting as many people as possible in there, A lot of people are moving back into some people are moving back to the countrysides and doing remote work and maybe starting a farm and maybe a local business, which is good because Japan's countryside is continually emptying and aging, and they need to address that problem. Immigrants would help that, but also getting more people out of Tokyo and the other metropolitan areas would help.
Do you think we'll see an uprising of like a new city maybe in our time in like the countryside?
I don't know. There's a possibility. There was talks a couple of years ago of making Tokyo into a sort of Singapore-esque city country, and then Japan itself becoming a federated state with like different areas becoming different states instead of prefectures. But that never really panned out, and I don't think that'll happen. But I think there might be a revolution in people moving back to the countryside. It's a simpler way of life, and it feels less stressful than getting onto a compacted train, huddling up as a sardine in during rush hour. I didn't have to experience that. I walked to work, which was nice. But
really,
yeah.
Tell me about like your morning commute in Japan, if you don't mind. I'm very curious because if you've walked to work, that's a foreign concept to me because living in SoCal and LA and that kind of stuff, it's a 30-minute commute plus, if not more, depending where you're going.
Right.
So what's that kind of like? That sounds foreign to me because a walk to work.
Basically, if I lived it was 10 to 20 minute walk to my office. I was just happened to be lucky enough to get that apartment, and to be honest, it's just really nice. Mind you, on rainy days, not so nice. There weren't any snowy days, but I would just walk in my suit to work and take off my walking shoes, put on my work shoes, clock in, and get to work. It was actually really nice. It made it so I could just relax for a fair amount of my morning before going into work. So that was fun.
I'm not sure if anyone has brought this up in your podcasts, but have you ever really talked about your students? Because I'm kind of curious of like what the classroom setting for Japan can be like in more of the countryside-esque kind of deal.
Well,
do you have any favorite students, or you remember anything as far as like what you enjoyed about your students, etc.?
I mean,
What's different?
I liked all my students. Some of them were okay, others were great, but I generally liked all of them. Now, I didn't work at a school in the sense of public education. I worked for a private English conversational company. So I had students ranging from toddlers to elderly people. And all of them were great. Usually it's a class of 5 to 6 at most. Sometimes I could have private lessons with students just one-on-one. It was a good time. I don't want to divulge what company I worked at just because of it, just keeping it things, but I worked for a fairly well-known company. That's, I had a good time, but ultimately just the situation, it just wasn't for me, so I came back, among other reasons too, which are private.
Mm-hmm. But I definitely want to pry into those.
Yes.
Just a little curious about it. Without that, why learn English though? Like it's kind of a strange, not dichotomy or hypocrisy here, but just they're not a very big fan of the gaijin, etc. So why try and expand their languages if they don't want to involve themselves with us further?
It's not that they don't want to involve themselves with us. Listen, it helps for business. It helps you get into college. If you want to study abroad and get an education, a worldly thing, English is a wonderful language to learn. That's why private schools exist for teaching English out there, because the education in the public system is based entirely around taking tests and grammar.
I see.
There's actually a wonderful article, Why Japanese People Don't Speak English. It's probably the first the word truth as to why Japanese people don't speak English. So I'm going to give you a list of 7 reasons based from an article written by kind of a Japanese cultural publication. Entirety of learning. So it's basically reading and writing. Most Japanese high schoolers, when they graduate, can write a paper akin to someone who has graduated from university in a English-speaking country. They have that capacity. That's how rigorous Japanese high school is. But there you go. English classes are usually about speaking but not learning skills like conversational skills. Japanese people tend to be scared of making mistakes and missing out on being able to do things. Japanese society does not need English to engage in the country. And then
Mm-hmm.
Japanese words are adopted from English, and then they become their own things, kind of like Japanese made English or Japanese shortening of English. Like, what do you think the like television becomes terebi? Apple becomes appuru. Patrol cars for
Mm-hmm.
like cop cars are patoka. Air conditioners
Mm-hmm.
are called eakon. McDonald's maku. Smartphones are called
Hmm.
sumaho. Yeah, it shortened things together to make different stuff. It's quite
All
strange,
right.
but
Right.
interesting. Oh, the archivist asks another question. How much of American pop culture was present in Japan? Did cinemas play Hollywood movies, and were there American pop songs on the radio, etc.? Never listened to Japanese radio. Probably they would play Japanese popular music. Cinemas absolutely play American movies, no question. They also play movies from Europe as well. They are a member of the international community. But yeah, American culture is pop culture is extremely present in Japan. It's just you have to go and look for it, but it's definitely there. Hope that answers your question, the archivist.
Hmm.
As for you, Hasyan, what else? What else was it like? Why do people learn English?
Yeah, just more of the not the why or how, but just like you said, they don't need to really involve themselves in Japanese culture. But I've
Right,
already answered it with the well, they just want to involve themselves elsewhere,
right.
um,
It can
which is
also be a
perfectly
fun. It can also be a fun hobby. I like learning languages myself. I've obviously learned Japanese because that's what I studied in college. But I'm also right now
acceptable.
currently learning Norwegian. I've
Hmm,
stabbed my hand at German and Italian. I'm thinking about learning French. You know, just it's learning languages are fun,
definitely.
if not
I've
difficult.
taken the college tried term myself. I did a couple of courses.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it does just it was good, but not really my not cup of tea. My brother and my father speak German, not all the time, but they can have
Sometimes.
conversations in it.
Nice.
But,
That's really cool to hear. Yeah, well, if you want an easier language that has a Germanic feel, I definitely recommend any of the Nordic languages.
hmm
And of course, you can always go to Spanish or French, Spanish being extremely useful in America. And,
Yeah, at
and just
least for
traveling.
SoCal, it's pretty useful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the second most spoken language in America is Spanish, and the
Mhm.
Hispanic population is continually growing, not just from immigration, but because of Hispanic families tend to have a very more conservative culture, tend to have more children, etc., as opposed to like
Okay.
white people or so on.
No, I suppose so.
Yeah.
So I guess closing in on here because we're getting kind of close to our time. Just because.
We can go as long as you want, man. If you're busy, we can get close to ending it,
Oh,
or if, yeah, my day is basically
maybe.
open. It's up to you.
I think we'll kind of cover in the last part of this is social things of
Mm-hmm.
um, what different cultural norms that we have, like smoking, that kind of stuff, drinking. I know there's a very big difference between that and us in Japan. So, what are the kind of cultural norms that are normally accepted here, but not so much in Japan?
Walking while eating,
It is
big
kind of a weird one.
big no no in Japan. Um, and they discourage it by the fact that there are very little to no trash cans in public outside of convenience stores. So you're encouraged to bring your trash home with you. Um, a different thing in Japan from America is that in Japan, it is legal to drink in public. So let's say it's a nice day, you want to go out and have a drink, but you just want to have it at the park. No one's going to hassle you, no cops are going to stop you over. As long as it's your day off, you're having a good time, that's fine. You can sleep in the streets if you're drunk, that's also cool, they won't bother you. Although the drug culture is extremely penalized in Japan. For example, talks of legalization of cannabis in Japan, big no no. It's considered as bad as heroin or crack over there.
Whoa.
Yes, and they're actually planning on making it even more strict. Like, I believe you can be jailed for. Let's see. There's talks of increasing it from like 3 years in jail to maybe 5 years in jail. And if you have cannabis in Japan, there's a strong possibility that you're going to get deported, um, or maybe lose your ability to enter Japan itself for the rest of your life. You can get nixed. I'm pretty sure that's
Huh.
what happened to Paul McCartney. He brought it into an airport in the 1970s, and now he's not allowed to enter Japan.
Is there a particular reason why they have such a harsh penalty for like I won't say like not a big deal, but just for cannabis specifically, is it like a Nixon thing? Is it like just a carryover from just a cultural norm of
Oh,
drugs are just bad?
no, no, no. Cannabis actually has a long traditional history in Japan as a traditional farming implement. They use it for shrine rope. You know the ropes you see in front of shrines around trees and then kind
Mm-hmm.
of like the gates and stuff. That's technically cannabis. It's actually the hemp that they
Yep.
use. It's industrial hemp. They've been growing it for years. Um, but yeah, prior to cannabis, prior to World War II, cannabis played a significant role in traditional Japanese medicine, but it changed in 1948. So actually, it was the American GHQ that made it illegal in Japan to use cannabis. But it was played off as a health concern, but in actuality, one of the reasons that cannabis manufacturing in Japan was banned was because the production of hemp as a cheap material to use for ropes and other things like paper and so on is something I believe the Americans didn't want the Japanese to have, so they made it illegal there, based
Uh,
on the prospect of it's that. I also think it's illegal because Japan and the West in general, when it comes to illicit drugs, doesn't want what happened to China in the Opium Wars to happen to their own countries, which is why it tends to be hit down upon hard. That's a
I
whole
see.
different type of
So
topics
it's
I could discuss with you.
so
Drug
it's a
history
kind
is
of mix of
very
the American
interesting.
drug war. It absolutely can be. Um,
For
as far as it goes,
I'll tell you a very interesting story before we
go for it.
leave for this topic. It's like the idea of the drug trade was actually stopped during World War II, and once it happened back on, a lot of the kingpins of the mafia and so on, and this is mafia history too, so it's really interesting. They got their
Mm-hmm.
start by going to Cuba, and all the gangs across America kind of worked together. It's like, okay, how are we going to start the shipping again? And then different magnets of shipping from like South America and so on happened. For example, you want to know why housewives in America were so peppy and full of life and bursting with energy back in the 50s?
Because most things had coke in it.
Yeah, they were popping things like that like crazy. Like it's wild the amount of drug
Also,
abuse they had
radium
women.
at some point, the radium girls and all that stuff during the atomic,
Yep, that was
craze and all that fun stuff. But
that
that's
was.
more 50, late 50s.
I'm pretty sure the radium actually started as like a watch, way to run a watch in the 1920s, and then of course there's this idea that oh yeah, let's nuke our corn so the atomic energy can make us Supermen. No, that's just gonna give you stomach cancer, guys. Probably not
Yeah.
a good idea. But yeah, that's basically what it is. The attitude to drugs had changed. And of course, marijuana is called what it is to sound like it's a scary thing from Mexico. And of course, racism plays into that because the only
Of
people who'd
course.
smoke marijuana were Mexicans, black people, and lazy white people who didn't follow the economy. So it's all fear
Mm,
mongering. And of course,
I see.
Nixon brought the thing to bear, Reagan made it worse, and here we are 30 years later.
And hey, when we were looking at legalization, and most of it, federal legalization also is on the table for some time for us,
I
which is also
know.
very interesting.
We just
I'm
got.
very curious how other countries would view us if it does federally become available. I mean, there's other small countries that do have it legalized also, but
Yes.
like it's just a curious thing to think about if like the U.S. went with that. Would Canada follow suit? Would
Canada has already followed suit.
somebody else? That's true.
Casual use of it is legal in Canada. I'm pretty sure the first country in the world to do it was either Paraguay or Uruguay.
Okay.
But we just have to see with this Democratic Senate, with the Democrats finally getting control of the Senate. I really do hope that they'll finally get rid of the filibuster and that a simple majority of 51 to 50 will push through that legalization. I'm a realist when it comes to politics, and I'm hopeful that the Joe Biden administration and the Democrats in the Congress will do something to push that through. But at the end of the day, we have to see that moving forward.
Hmm. Most definitely. And the political situation here, it gets little weird sometimes, as last 4 years have been a concern or consideration about that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, I myself am fairly independent when things come to politics. I definitely make sure to research the stuff I talk about, so I know what I'm talking about first,
Yes.
and then I really make sure that I can understand the bill or the policy that they want to implement and how it affects us
Yeah.
down the road, as it were. And
Right.
sometimes I look at legislation and it'll sneak in all sorts of just weird stuff into bills, and it's just so crazy to think about that. Like, oh yeah, so we can have the spending bill, but we're also going to throw in like all of these other requirements about like healthcare rights and stuff. It's like, but this is a spending bill for like traffic cones. What
Yeah.
is this doing here? I definitely feel politicians need to stop messing around with our legalization and need to kind of make
Yes.
like a layman's law, aka like no law can be undecipherable, and it must be in common tongue that everybody can understand in common parlances.
I
Because
think
like
that's a really
too often there's bills
archaic,
that are just these
strange.
gigantic
Yeah.
things.
There's this idea of pork barreling different things into different bills to get them passed forward. Totally, I completely understand. It's just
Mm-hmm.
wild. And if, for anyone who doesn't know, pork barreling in American politics is basically, all right, I am a representative and my vote will be indicative of passing it through to go on to the Senate. What can I get out of this and add onto the bill for me to sign it for you to get it through? I need my district to get this incentive and this incentive, this incentive, and yes, I will push through. Too much of that exists in politics in America. And of course, we do have legalized bribery in this country because
Yep,
of,
the tit for tat kind of deals, but yeah.
yeah, um, of course, Citizens United, but of course, in the 1970s under the Nixon administration, the beginnings of large donorship from private individuals and companies was allowed in a court case and such, which is what led to this idea of is a corporation a person? No, it isn't. It's a conglomeration of market forces and a company that is worked at by people. It is what it is.
Okay.
But yeah,
All right.
I agree.
Definitely thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for this talk and stuff, and you're perfectly fine, my dude. So thank you very much again, Mr. Basement, for all these wonderful talks.
Oh, please.
I'm actually gonna have to run for now. Go ahead and plug anything you're talking about. You know, this camera, that camera, as they say for Sean Evans on Hot Ones. Plug away what you're doing.
All right. So everybody, once more, we must thank Hastion for coming on, being the fourth guest of the podcast. I very much appreciate you coming on again. This was the A Guy in a Basement podcast. I am Wagon Meister, the host. If you want to follow my social medias, I have links to them below. But to say it is at Wagon Meister. Wagon Meister is also on Facebook, and as well a link to my personal Instagram, which you can all see below in the description in Twitch. Or if you're watching this on YouTube, it is in the doobly-doo down below. Is there any type of social media or projects you want to get at and promote before you go?
I don't really have anything except like I have a Twitter, which is Swans for Azeroth. That's a long story there, but it's a campaign to get swans and Azeroth along with ducks. As a friend for Lack of Quack, which is a buddy of mine.
Right. Well, there you go. So, if you give him a follow, guys, I'm sure he posts interesting stuff some of the time.
I try to be less active on, but yeah, sure. Thank you so much again, and you have a wonderful time.
You as well. I hope to see you all in the next stream, and thank you very much.